Hello, I've been running, and the name Kirk Langton popped into my head. Who is Kirk Langton?
I'm a creative director. I direct things, whether it be the creating of spaces, the creating of ideas, the creating of specific things, because I'm doing less of it with my hands now. I'm using more other resources. Yeah.
So, you are a creative director. How did you become a creative director?
That's the fortunate part. I had this very fortunate meeting 36 years ago, being an ordinary guy who didn't even have this dream, pushed into a chance meeting with Peter Minshall. In telling the story, I will add that for many days, months, even years, I still didn't know that I'd be creative. I saw it as just an opportunity at the time. But in retrospect, I see that chance meeting as the genesis of who I am, right? That chance meeting that led to, well, I'll call it, some of the greatest pieces of work that I've done, that he has done, that we've done together. Yeah.
Let's reflect for a moment on who is Peter Minshall.
The greatest artist of contemporary time. I will have to use his special definition right now that I've just heard him repeat over and over. I said that was mine. His is that to him, an artist is where he started. Then having gone to London and spent the years in theater, understood how to make that movement to make art live through what we call mass, right? And so to him, mass man trumps artists because mass is living art, and that the static two-dimensional art that could sit on a wall or a sculpture is where you start, but where you end is mass.
Hmm. That
Mm.
sounds as if you have been part of the ending, have you?
Well, yes. I came at, I think, the most opportune time. I came in, the band was at that time Santi Manite. I was approached, this is the year 1989. It's important in this story, especially 1989 and 1990. 1989, Santi Manite, the performance in the stadium. It's Carnival Sunday. I'm in a big red box that I'd paid 50 TT dollars for. And I'm dancing, rehearsing, you know, with the contemporaries of people like Alan Balfour and John, God, what's his name from Tricanal? Call his name. Remind me.
Alan Balfour.
Yes, John Isaacs, right. Real performers are guiding us. And I'm approached by a friend, Charles Applewhite, and he says, Cook, you could sew, right? And I say, yeah. He says, look, well, we have these 82 costumes that we need to make for tomorrow for this very show. Come go meet Minshall. And I take two friends with me. I'll tell the names after. Two friends with me to go because I'm thinking, oh, I have work to do. I'll need support. Minshall, having just been introduced, shows me this drawing, and I had enough sense to say I couldn't make that. And that's the first collaboration. He starts sketching, and we start draping on the taller, more statuesque of the two friends. We drape a costume, and we come up with a thing that, to my mind, needs just two stitches to make one costume. A 2-inch stitch in the front and a 2-inch stitch in the back. And we think that's perfect. Me and those two friends go off. We spend the whole Sunday night. It was the end of my Juve experience because the first time you sit down and you're doing work and Juve is passing outside, you never want to go Juve again. The weirdest part is that I was still wrong. The next day I found out that the place I wanted to put that fabric, which was not fabric, it was sugar bar, it couldn't reach under the machine. My stubbornness was to not call and ask what I should do. And that's what catapulted me into getting the opportunities from him, right? So all I did instead was substitute the corsage pins we used in terms of creating the prototype with safety pins. So I made a costume that was 2 pieces of sugar bark fabric and 2 safety pins. And he said, great, I have this idea to discuss. Come meet me after Carnival. I thought at that point, the young boy that I was, good, I'm going to get paid. As I said, I only saw it as what it was to me. And he tells me this story of the dream of a company. It's called the Callaloo Company. This has always annoyed me when I see people who, in looking at history of Minshall, refers to anything before 1989 as the Callaloo Company, right? There were different associations. At that point, it was called Mass Minshall. Callaloo is 1989. So if you go River and, and Callaloo and Jungle Fever and everything, that's not Callaloo Company. But unfortunately, this is how we codify history here. So everybody thinks that everything Minshall has done was under Callaloo Company. So I get a really cushy offer. Come sit with him, be his medium. I'll be there in the middle of it all. He'll design, I'll stand in the middle, and I'll make people execute the way I executed, which is with, kind of without his having to put his hands back into it, right? Out of that, the shorter version of the story is, out of that comes me adapting a costume that I had played, the ugliest version of it, full stop, Callaloo. Callaloo the band, or as some people call them in Trinidad, the Dairy costumes, because they'd seen the ad later on after the Olympics of these concentric hoops. But to me, it was a little too effeminate at the time that I was leaving school and playing. I didn't want to play in that. And I took the one that looked like a cape. And I stood on the road and I regretted it. I said, why we had to make all these hoop skates? Why it couldn't be like one concentric, spirals thing? And he said, oh, we didn't solve it yet. I said, well, I'll solve it. At that point, I had all of his experience under my belt, meaning he had nurtured day in, day out, 7 days a week. From that comes something that Trinidad and the world still calls Tantan and Sagaboy, i.e. the spirals, the ones that have been then to Barcelona, to Atlanta, to everywhere, basically, and imitated ad infinitum, who then turned 36 this August.
So you've spent a lot of time with Minshall. What would
Then, I'm spending a lot of time with him as we reflect. I've been pushed into another great opportunity, which is to work with QRC on their rebranding. They decided that their rebrand would be called Legacy, and it would highlight the contribution of QRC alumni in the creative space. When I did my first proposal to them, I said, in 5 years, we'll just do 5 creatives. You just showed me hundreds of names in a book, right? Let me find a way. Let me use Minshall for iconography, and we'll make Minshall the central figure. But this is 25th year, so I'll do 25 QRC alumni. And I found an interesting way, because we've gotten so many stories after the fact that shows how interesting the direction I chose. But because I was then pushed back into a conversation with him, not so much because of the word permissions, but I thought it was just decent to have a conversation with him, since I'm going to be taking techniques and stuff and using it in his name. It's out there, it's public, anyone can use it, but at least if I'm putting his name right next to it, let's have a conversation. Let me see that I'm doing it with the right kind of reverence that he would like. Wasn't always the way he would like, but at least I can say that he gave me some carte blanche. Having been the guy who was there at the beginning, he freed me to do some stuff. Some he still doesn't like. Hey.
So having worked with Minshall both when you were just beginning and now that you worked on his legacy, what would you say is a lesson you've taken away from just working with Minshall?
I think we go right back now to my title. It's exactly that. That's what he did best then. It's what I intend to continue doing more of now. Having the right team around you, drawing upon other people's experiences, upon other people's skill sets, creating a space for them to contribute. Yes, you might be the person with the idea, but that pulling together of many creative energies. There were others. You look at some of the other creations and he'll credit different people for different things. The mechanisms of making things move and the mechanics of it. It's not just worker bees. Sometimes it's people with amazing skills, right? And so we're back again, creative director.
So you've been the creative director. Would you like us to talk about any other role of a creative director, moving away a little bit from Minshall?
Yeah, well, it's the same whether, like I said before and implied, spaces. I do spaces, meaning I designed everything from restaurants here and an atrium there. And one that I particularly love telling people about, I say, oh, go to the cemetery. I've redesigned the cemetery. And everybody is like, they get this recoil because they don't think a cemetery has to be designed. And I say, yeah, it has to make some kind of spatial sense. You understand? Because given the size that, let's just say, a funeral could be, how do you organize it? How does cars enter and leave? How do people, relate to the space, right? Make sure we have a washroom in the cemetery, which is not normal necessarily.
So tell me, when you say you redesigned the cemetery in Point Fortin, could you tell us about that?
As I said, it was done as a goal to create a space that people can relate to, like a heritage site. The whole project pivoted on three focal images, one being the mighty Duke. When I first got a tour of it, there was a little piece of rebar sticking out of the ground that the cemetery manager pointed at and said, 5 years after his death, that's where Duke is. And I thought that was a horrendous thought, that if somebody passed and kicked that bar out and somebody stick it somewhere else, they might come and say, hey, that's where Duke is, right? So in this case, we had to get permission from the families and stuff. But I created a space for the other luminaries slash icons of Point Fortin at the time as well. Again, taking the second step, I don't want to call death on any of them, but the whole idea is that at some point we all die. How will we deal with it? How will people relate so that the visitor, both the one that's forced there by a funeral or the casual visitor, will say, aha, this is what Point Fortin. That's why I said design. There is not another one in our country that's remotely like that. The unfortunate part is that none of the icons we identified have died. I hope you understand how tongue-in-cheek that is. There is a plan of how we're going to honor them at Point Fortin, if and when.
And it's more when than if. So we've talked about your involvement with Minshall, and that's Carnival. We've talked about your redesign of the Point Fortin Cemetery. What else are you proud of?
At my age, which I will not state, I'm thrilled that I create spaces for much younger people to enjoy our amazing carnival, although I myself loathe to even go to those events. So I can tell you, I stopped being involved with a Juve since 2023. At that time, the Juve band was 24 years old, and I'd never been in the Juve band. I remember I gave it up 30 something years ago. But to hear people's retelling of their experience in the space and for what Carnival means to us, the same thing with fetes. I was involved with a very seminal fete as well, that every year it was very important. They said it started Carnival. It's spelled P-H-U-K-E-T. I can't say it because I know we're recording. Trinity has their own way of saying it. But I've only been there for like 2 hours, right? But again, creating spaces. I think I'll come right back around to this whole idea of the conversations I'm having now with Minshall, the conversations that have been led by the theme with QRC and the word legacy, is that I think I've been clearer about the idea that I've been put here for a purpose and that's part of it. It's not about what you're paid and what job you get and what house you live in and which car you drive. But what have you done to make things better? How do you view this space where you're planted and what have you contributed to its betterment.
If you had some young people in front of you who were
Right.
creative, what advice would you give them?
I tell them, expose them to everything. It's what I was fortunate to be part of, albeit I was fortunate because we had no choice. The example I always give is the radio station. When we had just like 2 radio stations, it didn't matter what type of genre of music you liked. What you had is that you were exposed to every single genre on the way to that. Whether it was because the DJ might play one of your songs, or you may have a little half hour of it. You know, the difference now, of course, I see what the problem is. Those very same young people tend to walk into their house and speak to Alexa or Siri and say, hey, play jazz or play dub or play soca. And that's all they get exposed to. We used to get exposed to everything. Similarly, I use music first, but it's the same with all the other parts of television. We used to see more of ourselves, not just American culture or the subcultures that are sellable. Sesame Street had everything. Trinidad, soca, kaiso, whatever, to opera. You know, the Singing Orange sang the song from Carmen. You know what it is like to talk to 20-something-year-olds and they don't know a single song from opera, right? I had a classmate, Ronald Sam, who is now known for being the black man who sings and an amazing opera singer because we grew up in a time when opera was part of our education, right? We even had an opera season in Trinidad as well, which we no longer have.
As we come to an end, what would you like us to remember from this conversation?
I think we need to start to do 2 things. One, honor our history. Remember our heroes, remember our icons. Try not to be or to expect them to be more than ordinary human beings with faults, trials, and temptations we deal with. But instead talk about the achievements, the ways that they have changed this space for us. That's one. And 2, yes, generally recognize that even, beyond the 4 walls of Trinidad, that there is even a bigger world, right? Like how I just said with opera, since we won't get that anymore here, right? Don't force young people only into one strata and think, well, it's all about academic. Yeah, if you expose them, they'll make the choice. They'll find the passion. There are a million stories I could tell of, seeing people find their passion, sometimes very late. It doesn't necessarily happen at SEA time at 11 or at what's called CSEC at 17. Sometimes it happens at 33. Get your young people exposed and remember the past generations.
Thank you very much, Kirk. Get the young people exposed, get them exposed to everything, and remember the past generation. Thank you very much, Kirk Langton.